is host of the Silk and Steel show. Carl, better get tell people about yourself, just so people, and just so the audience will know who you are.
Hi, I'm Carl Zha. I am a podcaster and a prolific shit poster on Twitter. I My specialty is China. I run a podcast, a Silk and Steel podcast, which primarily focus on China history, culture, and politics. This is my passion. If you want to have me talk about China, I can geek out on this for hours. Myself personally, I was born in China in 1976, 1 month after Mao passed away. So I'm the first post-cultural revolution generation in China. I spent my youth in China in the entire decade of 1980s, and then I came to the United States in 1990 to join my parents. My dad was studying in University of Illinois at Chicago since 1985. So second, I'm bicultural. I'm fluent in both English and Chinese, and I feel I have a lot to share because of my bicultural background.
Well, you do. Well, you do. I mean, it's
Especially when there's a lot of ignorance about China, I feel that I feel like there's a lot of disinformation. When there's a lot of intelligence agencies in the West that's actively trying to pollute the well of information about China. So this is how I was compelled to start my own podcast to share my own perspective.
well.
Hello.
I don't blame you. I understand where you're coming from with it. I mean, the reality of it is, the United States has felt, let's say, what's the word I'm looking for? Competition. It has had a certain bit of apprehension. And you can hear it either in the politics, you can hear it in media, you can hear it in the things that the political branch says. I mean, for example, BRICS is a really good example. After the war started, the West says Putin is isolated, Putin is by himself, Putin is, alone in the world. And then you look at the BRICS summit, and you have like 46% of the world's population are represented at that summit. There are 30 different nations, I believe more than 30 nations. These guys are making deals, these guys are shaking hands, they're happy, they're laughing. They are in an organization that is fundamentally, I just want to check. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. They're an organization that fundamentally is working for their own best ends. And you can see the level of, I don't want to call it terror, but you can definitely see this notion where the United States feels that the horse is out the barn and that they need to do something about it. And by the way they're trying to do something about it is very similar to what's taking place in Ukraine. We are going to use Ukraine as a battering ram to undercut Russia. Okay, in the same way, we are, will say the one China policy, but we are going to do everything in our power to try to get Taiwan to be a battering ram to undercut the progress of China. Give me your take on that, by the way. They have this notion of we believe the one China policy while doing everything to indicate that they don't believe in the one China policy.
Boner for China ever since 1949, the communist victory on mainland China. There is a period where the relationship started to normalize after Nixon's visit. So we had a brief period of U.S. China honeymoon period, and then and then in around um, like in the late Obama years, there was a decisive shift in the U.S. approach to China. It's no longer engagement. It's now it's full on containment of China to stop China's progress. This is primarily driven by the U.S. elite uh, trying to cling on the excuse me. Um, the U.S. elite is trying to cling on to its hegemonic status all around the world. They feel the rise of China is an active threat because here you have China that for the last 30 years that did not start any wars, did not participate in any wars, that was able to rise peacefully, and this fundamentally challenged the U.S. and the Western model. I mean, for the last 30 years, U.S. have been going around the globe wreaking havoc. This is why, as, as China rises and U.S. declines, you will see more and more copium being produced in the U.S. mainstream media about China, because what they're trying to tell the public is, look, if you think lives are bad in the United States, it's much, much worse in China. Don't look to China as an example. Do not think there's an alternative model of development. That's impossible. The United States here is the best you could get. What you see, what you get, and this is the best you could ever hope for. And that the idea that U.S. hegemony should be the norm, everyone should just accept it.
Well, Carl, wait, real quick. I want to double down on that because you're right. They do make it is a weird case. Back in the, let's say, the 80s, the U.S. would say the Soviet Union is an Iron Curtain. It is a repressive regime that is not something that you want, and that argument worked. People will accept that argument. Then you get to today, and the world says, well, we want a multipolar world. We want a world of equal nations engaging with each other to the best interests of everybody. We don't want a hegemon. And the U.S. says, well, what do you mean you don't want a hegemon? A hegemon is, hegemons are good. Hegemons are good things. We should keep the hegemon. And the rest of the world looks at this like with a certain level of incredulity, saying, are you out of your mind? Why would anybody want a hegemon? You're right. That the argument that was made in the 80s is different than the argument that is made now. It's somewhat this kind of naked hegemony. We are number one. We are the greatest. We are exceptional. We're indispensable. I don't think the rest of the world is on board for that level of argument and to be put into this kind of second class status, especially when you have other nations that are clearly rising and clearly equals, especially getting to the point of economic, industrial, and technical might and living standards. Carl, what do you
This
think?
is why a lot of people. This is why a lot of people in the global south, in particular, sees BRICS as an alternative international forum to the existing West and U.S. dominated institutions, and this is why U.S. feels the threat from organizations like BRICS, like Shanghai Cooperation Forum, like China's Belt and Road Initiative. They don't like alternatives where not only they're not part of, but they cannot dominate. And this, I want to go back to the one China policy for a moment, because United States started adhere to one China policy as a consequence of Nixon's visit to China. That was to normalize the relationship between U.S. and China. And during the trip, Nixon and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, they signed what's called the Shanghai Communique. And underlying the Shanghai Communique, the Shanghai Communique says United States recognizes there's only one China, and the government in Beijing is the sole legitimate government of China. The Taiwan Strait recognizes that there's only one China. And the U.S. recognizes this is an issue for the Chinese people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait to decide among themselves. This is not something that U.S. would interfere. That is the one China policy. The U.S. has decidedly moved away from that stance, which, by the way, is a foundational cornerstone of U.S.-China relationships since 1970s. And I want to quote Mao's quote from 1965 when he met the GLO delegation in Beijing. He told the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO delegates, he said, Israel and Taiwan are the basis of operation for imperialism in Asia. They created Israel for the Arabs and the Taiwan for us. They both have the same objective. And this still holds true today. U.S. is looking for proxies I mean, people say, oh, Israeli lobby hijacked the U.S. policy. That's bogus. Israel is not the tail that's wagging the dog. That's U.S. Israel and U.S. is the same dog. It's the same animal. The brain is all fused together. It's all connected. Israel is U.S. the tip of U.S. spear to destabilize the Middle East. The same way U.S. attempt to use Taiwan as a proxy versus mainland China. And more so today, now that U.S. has decided on a confrontational course with China.
Well, they don't believe that they could compete in real terms. It's that. Also, I don't think they expected that in 20 years China would be able to pull out what 200, 300 million people out of poverty in 20 years. We spent those 20 years bombing, killing, sending weapons to this place and that place, getting $35 trillion in debt. China didn't spend their time doing that. They spent their time building, making associations, whether it's in Africa and other parts of the world. They've become the hub for the world for things like things that people buy. If you go to your store, made in China. They found an economic model that was able to basically pull their people out of desperate levels of poverty. And I think from the United States, what they realize is industrial might translates into military might. I mean, if you think of the Second World War, for example, the United States wasn't a military country. We were an industrial powerhouse. And within a very short period of time, that industrial powerhouse started to arm the world. We had military, like full-fledged military on two sides of the globe, fighting a war while also arming Britain, the Soviets, etc. That is an astonishing show of industrial might for a country of what, 320 million people. Okay, what does that look like when you have a country of 1.5 billion people? What does that look like? And then when you get technical prowess to go along with that, you get China putting people on the moon, trying to make a moon base. You get China in their relationship with the rest of the world. I mean, BRICS is more like 50% of the globe. In fact, China and India by itself is 50% of the globe. Like, it's hard to get across the scale of this group and the scale of China by itself in regards to what they could accomplish if you put it in the context of, okay, well, what could the U.S. accomplish with their industrial might of 300 million when China has 4 times that amount? So you can imagine why there's a bit of apprehension in the U.S. and why they're looking for ways to undercut that. And again, as I point out, as you pointed out, proxies. We don't want to get into a direct war. However, we are okay with arming other people to get into that war, whether that's Ukraine, whether that's Taiwan, whether that's separatist groups in South America, like the kill squads that we used to pay and support. You're right. That's absolutely true. My question, which I'm fascinated by, China goes with this idea of a win-win relationship. That is the way they talk about it. That is the way they see it. We want to be partners around the globe. We don't want to put in military bases. We want to build roads, highways, etc. And we want to build relationships. All right. How does a country that believes in a win-win relationship deal with the country that is zero-sum? Because we don't believe in win-win relationships. We believe we are primary. We are indispensable. Everybody else is dispensable. We are not. So if China believes in a win-win relationship, how does it deal with a country that doesn't believe that and believes purely in zero-sum?
The $6 trillion question, Jamal. I mean, Xi Jinping on various occasions have told U.S. representatives, whether Tony Blinken or Jake Sullivan, whoever's come visit, he said the world is big enough for both China and United States to coexist and to prosper together. But that's not the mentality of the U.S. leadership. U.S. leadership only has this zero-sum hegemonic understanding of the world. It's like, okay, your loss is my gain. But on the China side, their door is always open. Even at the time when U.S. is closing door on Chinese investment, putting tariffs on Chinese products, China has welcomed U.S. businesses to come to China. You see Xi Jinping, you see they welcome Elon Musk, Bill Gates, etc. Like they are not opposed to do business with business. China is business. Business of United States is war. This is a fundamental incompatibility. But for China's side, their view is, you know what? If you build it, they will come and they will always hold the door open for anyone who's interested to make a deal. This is why the Chinese model is holding a lot more attraction to what the US has to offer right now. And this is why US is panicking about particularly nations of global south coming together to hold their own forum. They talk about isolating Russia. Like when they talk about international community in the U.S. media press, they're really talking about Western Europe, United States, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan. All the U.S. Basically, U.S. and all the U.S. vassal states across Europe and Asia, and that's not the majority. Bigger than the BRICS. I mean, and it's much bigger than 50%. I mean, we're talking about global majority of 80% of the population. A lot of people right now they want to join BRICS, but they're being held back by the fear of United States. Because U.S. tend to throw a shit fit whenever they see more countries join the BRICS. So there are people that are kind of they're very like Indonesia, they very much want to be part of the BRICS, but they don't want to offend the United States. So what they do is, they still okay, you know what? Let's just do a stealth BRICS. We'll sign up with the Belt and Road Initiative project with China. We do business with Russia. We will welcome Lavrov with an open arm. I mean, Lavrov is a rock star when he goes to Indonesia. The people, the journalists here, they love him. But this is the side that we don't see much in the Western media. We try to project the enemy of the White House as these outcasts, the rogue states, like everybody pariahs. But that's so far from reality, especially in the global South.
You're absolutely right. I mean, again, Lavrov is an amazing diplomat, and he gets when he went to Africa, and all of those people were lining up to shake his hand and everything else, and the U.S. is like, Russia's isolated. No, you're absolutely right. Like you said, that's a $7 trillion question, and I'm fascinated by that question. Like you know, look, part of the reason that we are heavy into war and the way that we're heavy into war is because it allows a certain measure of control. If that place is in chaos, we are primary. If we can bog this country down in a war, if we can make them use their resources for a war, then that is something that we don't necessarily have to deal with. So, our friends, we're going to keep our friends. Our enemies, we're going to demonize. We're going to try to find separatist groups. I mean, in Iran right now, where they're trying to use the MEK. MEK is a terrorist group of lunatics. And the U.S. still acts as if we're going to work with this group. Or even in Syria, where we were working with terrorists to try to undercut the Assad regime. And even now, sitting on oil and wheat in order to keep the government from coming back into fruition. China's model has been diplomatic relations and bringing down hostilities. So when Saudi Arabia and Iran got together, the world was like, whoa, when did that happen? The U.S. had nothing to do with it. And it just came out of the blue. You're getting India and China coming together. And I want to get your take on that. There were border disputes between India and China where the U.S. was trying to use India in order to basically antagonize China and Russia. And now you have the situation where Modi apparently is not buying into it. And Modi and Xi Jinping has apparently shaken hands and come to an agreement on the border issue. What is going on with that issue? And what was the ultimate agreement that they came to in order to settle the border disputes?
So India and China, their biggest disagreement is actually the border issue, the border dispute, which started, before the founding of two nations. Actually, the border issue between India and China is a legacy of British colonialism in Southeast Asia. When the British came, when they took over India, made it British India, they start to encroaching on surrounding territories. That's when they start to push into Tibet. And this is at the time when China was weak under the Qing dynasty after Opium War, and there was not much China could do to resist the British aggression. So British would arbitrarily draw a line on the map and say, now this is part of our territory, without consultation to either people on the ground living there or the Chinese. And so China never recognized those borders. And those then that border dispute got inherited when India became independent in 1947 following World War II, and then the establishment of People's Republic of China in 1949. Now there were attempt to for border negotiations. One of the deal that Premier Zhou Enlai offered in 1950 was like, okay, we recognize we have historical dispute, we have claims on the territory you control, and you have claims on territory. Why don't we just do a Solomon's justice? Let's not alter the line of actual control. You like we just make the current line of control the international border. So like I give up my claim on the territory you control, and you give up claim on the territory I control. So the existing actual line of control make an international border and no more dispute. But that was rejected by India because at that time, Nehru was facing a lot of pressure domestically from its own opposition, who are actually want India to align more closely with the United States, because Nehru was pursuing a policy closer alignment with the Soviet Union at the time, but the opposition was accusing Nehru of selling out, giving territory to the Chinese, so that border dispute was never resolved, and in fact that led to a brief war in 1962 between China and India over the border issue. Now there was always tension in the border. Now, what United States try to do, like they try to inflame these existing tensions, and they try to make loop India onto this anti-China bandwagon. The U.S. try to put together what they call the Quad of democracy: Japan, Australia, U.S., and India, to contain China. Now, India has its own. I mean, India sees itself as a great power, inheritor of ancient civilization. India is not willing to be a pawn to United States. India has its own foreign policy objectives as a great power. It doesn't want to be a mere proxy of United States. India is not going to fight U.S. war for the U.S. India is going to do what's best for India. So what happened then is during the Ukraine war, India said, look, we're going to stand by our old friends, Russia. We're going to continue to buy Russia, because they're like, okay, U.S. does not recognize partnership. They say call partner allies, but there's no partner or allies. They only recognize the master and the vassal relationship. So when India pushed back, U.S. imposed sanction on Russia. We saw a sharp downturn in the India-U.S. relationship. This is when you saw that now in Canada and U.S. are claiming India are sending assassins to kill Canadian citizens, to kill U.S. citizens. That's a big diplomatic role right now. That's a big so even India, who just want to be respected as a regional power, as a great power, United States is not willing to give that respect.
Carl, by the way, real quick, they did the same thing with the S-300. When India was about to purchase the S-300 missiles, the U.S. comes in and says, don't do that. And if you do that, we're going to pass sanctions on you. And now all of a sudden, Canada is kicking out somebody from India because they were trying to have assassinations and all this other. You're right. None of this stuff became an issue until the relationship between India, China, and the U.S. got closer. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's because U.S. don't believe in partnership. It's like my way or the highway. So if India, you're not going to play by our rules on isolating Russia, we're going to try to play screws on you. And this is when India realized, you know what? I have alternatives. I can make up with. We don't have to have a confrontational relationship with China. So India and China sit down together and they work out an agreement to de-escalate the border tension, where both sides will pull back their border patrols, so they won't come in contact with each other, so there won't be any conflict. And this, like this is type of conflict resolution that's alien to Washington, because Washington always believe escalate, escalate, and escalate, and so we can sell more weapons for our military industrial. but then you have and working out a deal where peace is possible. And this makes U.S. edge. They're not used to this. They don't understand this way, this mode of operation. The only way they understand is we're the top dog. We dictate to you, and you do what we say. It's either my way or the highway.
Yes, yeah, I agree with you. But I don't think it entirely started off that way. I mean, again, we were somewhat of an isolationist nation at one point. And I think after the Second World War, where all of these institutions were set up, we're going to set up the UN, we're going to set up all of these trade bodies. That stuff was set up with the idea that we will remain top dog based on the institutions that are in place. So we can say, well, hey, we have these institutions, we have a rules-based order, etc., and we're just following the rules. Mind you, they set up the rules. Okay, fast forward to a situation where China gets more adept, gets more diplomatically adept, get more industrially adept, and starts to dominate this notion of trade and this notion of industry and the international relations and everything else that's going on. And the US says, well, wait a minute, that's not right. You can make a car for $5,000. Well, we can't make a car for $5,000. We can't compete with that. Or you're making all of these relationships around the globe. You're making all of these solar panels. Yeah, climate change is a big deal, but we can't make a solar panel for that inexpensive. We can't put out that level of volume or that volume of steel. And so they started to get antsy with the way the world is set up. And when they felt like, okay, we are having difficulty competing under the model to which we set up, then we need to change the model. Hence, rules based. Our rules can change at any particular moment, and we will go after China as an opposition or as opposing force. You get the TPP from Obama. We're going to do the Asian pivot. We're going to make associations with all of these nations in Asia in order to kind of cram out China. Like, I think the issue is we are having difficulty competing on an economic status. And in the economic sense, because we're having difficulty competing, Taiwan is now an issue. The Philippines is now going to be an issue. Bangladesh is now going to be an issue, especially when we can necessarily get India. And it seems that they are gearing up for war. And it's like the premise of it is pretty outrageous. If we can't be the hegemon, then we are willing to destroy the world. I think that is outrageous. And let me ask you this: part of I think the U.S.'s apprehension is that they believe that China wants to be the new hegemon. Now, if you listen to somebody like John Mearsheimer, he would say, well, obviously, they're going to be the new hegemon if we're not. Is that the way China thinks, though, from your point of view? Is that the way China thinks, that we are going to be the new hegemon?
So I have a lot of respect for John Mearsheimer. He's a scholar. He understands the U.S. imperialism very well, and he analyzed it in great detail. The thing is, John Mearsheimer understands U.S., but he doesn't really understand China. So he assumes
Well, real quick, Carl, real quick. I mean, I always tell people when I do videos and stuff, I'm an American. My point of view is based on here and how we respond, how we outlook. And so when certain things come up, I would be like, well, obviously this is the case because I'm looking through my lens. And I think we're assuming that that lens is universal. That, obviously if a country is taking the lead, they're going to be a hegemon. Obviously, if they're in the prime position, they're going to take actions of countries that are in that prime position. But you're saying China is not that way. You're saying they're looking at this differently.
Well, I mean, look at the U.S. its own history and tradition. I mean, U.S. started as WASP, right? The white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and Protestantism is very much like a foundation for the early American state. And in the early days, America was sending missionaries going around the world trying to convert everyone to Christianity. And now we just substitute Christianity with slogans of democracy and freedom. But it's the same mentality. We believe the so-called universal value, that's American value imposed on everyone. And this is not how China works. China could care less about what you do in United States, what happens in United States. Americans really worry about like China is going to send paratroopers to in Appalachia. I see that kind of crazy talks on the Twitter. China could care less what you do in United States. What they want is to give their own people a more prosperous life. They want to build up China, to make China stronger, to make people inside China happier. That has always been their primary concern, right? But people like Mearsheimer, because their only frame of reference is from like the American U.S. centric worldview, so they assume U.S. is the norm. If anyone who comes to the U.S. position, then they must act exactly the way we do because they must see the world exactly the way we do. And that's just not true. China, they have different culture, they have a different tradition, they have different history. They see the world in the Chinese way, not the American way. And again, this is the whole idea of BRICS. This is why BRICS hold attraction for people, because BRICS is advocating for sovereignty. And the sovereignty means each state, each nation, they get to decide on their own what model of development they adopt, how they want to develop their own society without like a hegemon somewhere else telling them what to do. They're joining BRICS for exact reason. They're getting sick and tired of the U.S.-led, world order. Like U.S., by the way, it's like you said, it's undermining the institutions that it has helped to build since World War II. U.S. Helped build up UN, and now U.S. Obviously does not respect UN at all, and because they find the UN increasingly inconvenient when there's more now the global South are gaining voice, and so U.S. is actively sabotaging the institution it helped to create, because if prosper under the international framework that U.S. has itself helped to create. So now U.S. only talk about rule-based international order. Like Putin says, whose rules? Who are making those rules? And of course, it's the people in Washington. They're dreaming everything from their head, and if anything that don't conform to their priority, then it's not rule-based international order. This is why this kind of hypocrisy is becoming increasingly apparent to the people of the global South, and this is why they're seeking alternatives. They are turning to Russia, turning to China, because what they had, IMF, World Bank, wasn't working for them. In fact, those are the real debt traps that have been trapping Africa in poverty for the last few decades.
So true. So true. And, especially with the Gaza issue, I'm going to let you go because we're coming to the hour, but especially with the Gaza issue, right? I mean, you get a situation where Russia goes into Ukraine. Mind you, the U.S. invaded Iraq. The U.S. knocked over governments in South America left and right. We destroyed Afghanistan. We destroyed Syria. Russia goes in because NATO expands to their border. They overthrow the government of Ukraine. They call it a revolution of dignity. And as it expands to the Russian border, they tried to put Ukraine in NATO. Russia responds. Now, when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, we were willing to end the world in order to prevent additional missiles from the Soviet Union from getting into Cuba because it was basically on our border. They immediately would say, well, Russia doesn't have security guarantees. Russia doesn't get to say so, etc. John Kirby comes out crying on TV because of civilians. Israel goes on a killing spree, a murder spree in Gaza, in Lebanon, Syria, and even attacked Iran. And the U.S. doesn't say squat. In fact, they go and defend Israel's behavior for doing so. They kill, 20,000 kids in Gaza alone. That's a low count. That number goes to 100,000, from 40 to 100,000 civilians, two-thirds of which are women and children. John Kirby was not on TV crying. In fact, John Kirby came out and said, well, war is war, it's a bad thing, etc., etc. When the UN passes a resolution saying we call for a ceasefire right now, and this is after the US kept blocking resolutions, the US comes out and says, well, that is, it was something like provisional, meaning the UN Security Council's resolution doesn't really have to be followed. Okay, well, that's pretty astonishing for a UN Security resolution to just be somewhat provisional, to just be an option to follow. That is not the way that necessarily works. I'm saying this to say, you're absolutely right. They destroyed the institutions that they helped create in order to maintain the world in the way that they wanted the world to be. And again, my point initially was, well, they set up those institutions because they knew they were going to be ahead of those institutions. Like I'm setting up a framework for us to operate in that's going to be fair and honest, knowing full well that you have every advantage in the context of that framework and that you're going to get political, diplomatic, and economic advantage. And when that no longer remains true, well, we need to have a different framework. Oh, I know, rules-based order. Yeah. Carl, thank you for this, man. I know it was at the last minute. I deeply appreciate this. Look, I would love if you would come to visit me like once a week to have this conversation. Because you're right. There is this kind of weird press against countries that we feel that we're in competition in. And it is exuded in the political space. It is exuded through media. It's ever present. It's astonishing. I mean, even the China virus thing, in the way that was talked about, in the way they used it to try to denigrate China. The rest of the world is not seeing it. And look, I don't have any enemies abroad. On things meaning I want to be friends with these countries. I don't think this way of war and everything else needs to stop. So, Carl, man, thank you for this. Carl Zha, I'm going to give your reading once I close it because I need to be able to see the calendar. But thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamal. Invite me back anytime. I'd love to talk.
Carl Zha. Carl Zha is host of a Silk and Steel podcast focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Zha. Follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk In, and subscribe to the podcast at patreon.com/Silk in Steel. Carl, man, thank you for joining me.